Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Ask SENSS webinar, which is the last one before Christmas, as we're rapidly approaching the deadline. Today's session will be recorded, as we've done with all other sessions so far, and we will be putting the recording on the website. And given that this is the last time that I'm delivering this webinar, it's going to take a slightly different format than all the others, because effectively you can review the recordings of all the others. So there's no point of me kind of restating the same information over and over again. So today's webinar will have two parts. The first part will be a part where I just simply give you some basic information around SENSS. And part two will be devoted predominantly to questions. I will approach it in two ways. One is I will be picking up questions from you as participants, and I'm happy for you to either put your questions in the chat. You will see me from time to time looking on my side. This is where I've got my chat kind of function open from Zoom. But what I have also done is I went through the webinars from the last few times we delivered them, and I have picked up the most important questions or the most frequently asked questions, and I put them on slides, and I'll try to give kind of provide complete answers to those questions as well. So you can either post your question there, or I will be working through those questions, and hopefully I will be covering most of the material you would like to get covered today. I'm just saying that if you haven't found a supervisor yet, the clock is ticking really fast. The deadline for the SENSS applications is on the 25th of January. Most UK universities will be closed over the Christmas period, and people won't be necessarily responding to their emails very quickly. So you've got a couple of days till most people go on leave. I'm just saying that, sharing that, because it's a UK tradition that UK universities close over the Christmas period, and most people don't engage with their email. So bear that in mind, that the first few days back from holidays will be beginning of January, 6th of January, and from that point there's going to be only under 20 days for the final submission of the proposal. So it's really crucial, if you haven't secured, or if you've been in touch with the supervisor, to ensure that you've got a timeline, a clear timeline of collaboration with them. So that's the way we will be kind of delivering today's seminar. As I said, I wanted to do something slightly different, because when it comes to the general information around SENSS and the general information around the proposals, there are 5 recordings there which cover approximately the same information here and there. Sometimes the questions might differ from one recording to another, and this is why I decided today to do a question-driven kind of approach to Ask SENSS. Let me start first of all by just saying a few words about us, what we are, who we are, and what we do. So we are the South and East Network for Social Sciences. We are one of ESRC's, which is the Economic and Social Research Council Doctoral Training Partnership. We are not the only one. There are another 14 doctoral training partnerships across the UK. And each one of those 14 doctoral training partnerships, with a very similar timeline to ours, a few days before, a few days after, will be offering a number of studentships. So SENSS, of course, is one DTP where you can make an application, but you can then make applications to any other doctoral training partnership you wish. So you're not constrained that if you apply to SENSS, you can only apply to SENSS or ESRC funding. The complication there is you can only apply once, so you can't make multiple applications through multiple institutions for SENSS. You can only apply through one SENSS institution. But as I said, you can apply to any of the others. If anybody wants to find what are the other doctoral training partnerships, I've got the website there, and you can go and find out. in between the 15 doctoral training partnerships, there is a very wide coverage of UK higher education institutions and definitely a very good geographical coverage. So what we do is we receive funding from the ASRC, and we then distribute that funding to effectively studentships and postdoctoral fellows. And I'll leave postdoctoral fellowships on the side at the moment because that's not for you. It's for people that have completed their PhD. And if anybody has already tried to access that competition, just bear in mind it's only for people that have or are very close to completing their PhD. Overall, just to give you a sense of the size of the fund, overall in between the 15 doctoral training partnerships, there is funding for around 500 to 600 studentships every year. Ourselves at SENSS, last year we offered, which was the first year, we offered 41 to be precise. And effectively, in between the 8 institutions, the starting point was around 400 applications. So out of 400 applications, there were 41 that got funding in the end. I appreciate it's not a huge success rate, but it's still a relatively good success rate. 10% success rate is not a bad success rate. I've got a question from Nigel, Daniel, which I will pick up now. Are international applicants eligible for SENSS scholarship? The answer is yes. And there are no criteria in terms of countries. There are no criteria in terms of age. There are no criteria in terms of income or anything like that. International students are considered all those that are not a British national, which is one, or they don't have settled or pre-settled status if they are European Union citizens. So anybody else, any European student, any international, other international student coming from other parts of the world, they are automatically considered international students. So the only ones that are not international students are home British nationals and EU students with settled or pre-settled status. Everybody else is international student. So international students are eligible for funding. They will get exactly the same amount of funding as home students. They will get exactly the same stipend. They will get exactly the same fees paid. There won't be a request from your home university to top up the fees. So you will get a fee waiver for the difference between EU and non-EU fees. So there's no hidden costs there. What I'm afraid SENSS does not cover is any costs which are related to visa, any costs which are related to the NHS surcharge or these things. So I'm afraid these are things that we can't cover. What we will cover is your stipend and your fees. And on top of that, we will be giving you some additional research funding, which is roughly £3,000 across the 3 years of the PhD for you to attend conferences and things like that. So these are the areas that we cover. The only complication with international students is that the ESRC is asking us to implement a quota. And what does that mean? It means that out of the 40 studentships, let's say that we will be awarding this year, we cannot award more than 30% of those studentships to international students. So this is not a SENSS kind of regulation. This is a regulation that you will find in every single doctoral training partnership, and it's a regulation from the ESRC. So in reality, out of the 40 places, there are 12 places completely open to international applicants. So if the top 12 candidates in our competition are all international candidates, they will get those 12 studentships. Anybody below those 12, even if they are in position 13 or 14, they won't be able to be eligible for funding. I'm afraid that that's not our regulation, that's the ESRC regulation. So there's still open places for international students, but they are limited in terms of numbers from the ESRC. So just to give you an indication of those numbers, we would be expecting to roughly be able to support about 12 to 13 international students on an annual basis. We are a partnership across 8 institutions in the Southeast, and the 8 institutions are there on the screen. University of East Anglia, University of Essex, which is a coordinating institution, Goldsmiths, City, Lincoln, Cranfield, Middlesex, and Roehampton. And if you wish to submit an application for SENSS funding, you would need to apply for a PhD to one of those 8 institutions. I just want to clarify here that SENSS is an organization that supports your funding. We are not awarding the PhD. The PhD will be awarded by one of those 8 institutions, and therefore you need to have an application made to one of those 8 institutions before you apply for funding. So we're not giving you the PhD. One of the 8 institutions will be the institution that will give you the PhD. We will be supporting that PhD process through the funding. Very interesting question. Reza, I'll pick it up now. There is a question, how many students each universities pick up? In principle, there is no quota per institution. So it's not that East Anglia will get 5 and Essex will get 10 and Goldsmiths will get 3 and City will get 1. It is an open competition across institutions as well. So every year, some institutions tend to perform better than others. So just to give you an example, last year, the top institution was Goldsmiths. Goldsmiths managed to secure 12 studentships. And the next institution was East Anglia with 10 studentships, and all the other institutions received smaller numbers. So in reality, we haven't kind of ring-fenced a number of studentships per institution. It's an open competition. The top proposals will receive funding. If all top proposals come from a single institution, that single institution will basically take all studentships. Equally, and I'll come to that in a few minutes, there is no ring fencing for specific thematic areas. So the 6 thematic areas are all open to as many studentships as they can attract in terms of quality. So the overarching principle there is the quality of applications, and that's how we decide. Now, a very small disclaimer here, and the disclaimer is that there are 3 institutions who are what we call pockets of excellence. And what does that mean? Institutions that are active in research, but they haven't been part of a doctoral training partnership in the past. And therefore, we give them some additional support to ensure that they get studentships. Those 3 institutions are Cranfield, Middlesex, and Lincoln. Cranfield, Middlesex, and Lincoln are guaranteed a minimum number of studentships in the competition. So Cranfield and Middlesex are guaranteed 2 studentships, and Lincoln is guaranteed 1 studentship. So when we reach the big list at the end, where we have a ranking of all the different proposals according to the score and the quality, out of that list, Cranfield will get 2, Middlesex will get 2, and Lincoln will get 1, irrespective of which position and irrespective of whether these are international or home candidates. Those will be studentships that will go to those institutions. So that's the only kind of additional information there. So technically, if you apply through Cranfield, or if you apply through Middlesex, if you apply through Lincoln, you might have a slightly better chance to secure a studentship than if you apply through East Anglia or Essex. Let me pick up a couple of other questions. what is the minimum educational requirements needed to apply for SENSS? That's a question from Anjana from Sri Lanka. Now, this goes back to what I said around we are not the institution that gives you the PhD. So effectively, as long as you can get admission to one of those 8 institutions, and the admission is open for students that come straight from their undergraduate, because we are in a position to fund a master's here. So you don't need to have a master's. You can come in with your undergraduate. As long as you get admission for a PhD from one of those 80 universities, effectively, it means that you meet their educational requirements. From a SENSS point of view, from the funding point of view, there is no minimum or best educational requirement. So it's more about the admission process for that home institution. The next question is from Anika. Do the proposal subjects need to be applied to UK society in order to be eligible to the SENSS funding? What if the angle of the dissertation ends up changing throughout the course of the study? Now, the 2 very different questions there. Let me pick them up one by one. So the proposal subjects, they don't need to be applied to the UK society. Let me just go to this slide here. So the way SENSS has been created is it has been built on 6 thematic panels. So we're not a discipline-based doctoral training partnership. We operate on what we call grand challenges: sustainability and climate emergency, health, well-being and social care, justice institutions and social change, resolving uncertainty and addressing crisis, digital social sciences and advanced methods in socio-economic research. Your PhD topic should be talking to one of those thematic areas. And therefore, there is no geographical perspective. Just to give you an example, and I've got it further down, it's actually a live example of a student that is starting their PhD with us, or started their PhD with us. They're doing a PhD around societal issues in Nepal. So it doesn't have to be a UK-based project to be eligible for SENSS funding. The way these thematic areas were decided was based on the ESRC priorities, so what ESRC wants to fund, which is quite crucial because we need to talk to our funder, and also the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals are global goals, as you know. So on the website, there is a list of each of those thematic panels with the associated ESRC priorities and with the associated Sustainable Development Goals. And as long we appreciate that there is societal impact from your project, the geographic context doesn't actually matter. Now, the second question is a bit more difficult, but because what happens with SENSS is you apply for funding with a specific proposal. So although there is a process where you can actually change that proposal, you cannot constantly changing the angle of the dissertation. There must be something that drives that change. So there might be a methodological change, there might be, access to participants, things like that. But generally, we would expect the candidates to complete their PhD on the basis of the project they have applied for funding. So we wouldn't expect you to change constantly your proposal. Subtle changes are acceptable. If we're talking about major changes, there is a process that you need to follow in order to get our agreement for the major change. What is the percentage of widening participation criteria? Again, a very interesting question. So there are several, as I call them, initiatives that talk to widening participation. The 2 most important ones that you probably need to know is that as part of the selection process so you make your original application, and what you do is you apply for a PhD place at SENSS, and you apply for a PhD place at one of the 8 institutions, and you apply for funding at SENSS. Once we complete with the application process, which is deadline on the 25th of January, SENSS returns those applications back to the home institutions. So we look at how many candidates they've applied through East Anglia. We return those applications to East Anglia. How many to Essex? We return those applications to Essex. And we ask East Anglia and Essex to make nominations for the next stage, which is a SENSS selection stage. So institutions have to select from that pool of candidates. Now, the widening participation there plays an important role, because what we do is we ask institutions to give us a normal candidates, as I would call them, and then 2 candidates who fulfill the widening participation criteria, and those are the protected characteristics, and they are on the website. So institutions have 2 additional nominations they could make, but each of those 2 nominations, they have to come from a widening participation criteria background. One could be from any widening participation. So they could be a carer, they could be a disabled student, they could be someone from a low socioeconomic background, they could be someone from an ethnic minority. The second student needs to come from a Black and ethnic minority background. So that's one initiative that effectively gives more opportunities to students that come from underrepresented backgrounds to go forward. The second initiative is that when it comes again to that big list where we look at all the projects that have made it to the final stage of SENSS, 3 studentships will be ring-fenced for those that come from BAME background, Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Now, frequently I'm getting asked, are those EDI criteria applicable to international candidates also? And I'm afraid the answer is no. At the moment, the EDI criteria apply only to home students. And again, this is not our regulation. This is an ESRC regulation. And the only thing I can say here is that I'm working with the ESRC at the moment on a project that will allow us to define widening participation from an international perspective. And therefore, hopefully in the future, we will be able to expand those criteria to international candidates. So if we have an international candidate who's disabled, I'm afraid we cannot pick up that information as part of our competition. It's not what I think it's fair, but I'm afraid this is what the regulation is at the moment. Rebecca is asking, are we able to apply to study part-time? So all institutions, all thematic areas are open to part-time studies. The only element of regulation there is that the part-time cannot go below 50%. So 50% of your time has to be spent on the PhD at a minimum. So it could be 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, or 100, which is the full time. You can't have a full time, let's say, you can't have a part-time job that is 70% and then PhD 30%. That's not allowable by ESRC rules. It is allowable to have a job which is 50% and your PhD 50%, or a job which is 40% and your PhD 60%, and so on until the full time. So that's the kind of part-time. So all institutions, all areas, all thematic panels are open to full-time and part-time applications as well. Do we need, Katerina is asking, do we need to provide an apostille of our diplomas? Usually, most institutions will ask you to provide your transcripts, and whatever the institution is requiring you to submit is the same for SENSS. So we won't ask you anything different from what the home institution where you apply for the PhD will ask you. Now, a very frequently asked question is the next one. Younger from South Africa, struggling to link with a supervisor from the 8 institutions. Best way to secure a supervisor. This has always been an issue, and I think there are two points to address in this question. First of all, identifying the right person and then contacting the right person. And at the end of this presentation, I have a series of websites that we have created, a few blogs around finding a supervisor and delivering. And if you go to the previous recordings, I also have a section specifically on finding a supervisor, so you can revisit that section and find a bit more of information. So my first approach would be identify which is the institution that I would like to study. You know, whether it's Cranfield or Middlesex or East Anglia. You know, I get a sense from that institution as to whether I fit with the overall culture. I would then go to the department and look at the different structures, you know, and look at my topic and people that might have the expertise and the experience. So that's the identification part. It does require some work, but it's the only way you can ensure that the person you are approaching is the most appropriate for your supervision. Just to give you an example, I received an email a couple of days ago about someone who's asking me to be their supervisor for a SENSS funded project. The topic has nothing to do with my research interest. So even if I was able to supervise, which at the moment I'm not able because I have the oversight of the competition, so there is a conflict of interest. Even if I was able to supervise, that would be a topic that is far from my research interest because it was around sports and tourism, which, you know, I've never done any publications on that. So it's really crucial to ensure that, you know, your topic fits very well with the supervisor's research interest. And one way you could look at that is look at what kind of projects their existing supervisees are undertaking, and that might be a good way of identifying whether a supervisor is appropriate for you. Then it comes to the kind of communication part. So I would draft an email with, you know, an abstract of my proposal saying that I would like to study for a PhD under their supervision. I would like to study and secure SENSS funding. So you get them interested in that element. And I would try to kind of give them as much information as possible for my area and why I am a good candidate for that topic. So it could be, for example, things from your personal experience, things from your professional experience, you know, your motivation for pursuing that PhD that kind of intrigues that supervisor to communicate back with you. And of course, if you have identified certain people in institutions, the alternative would be to try to contact with the operational lead of that institution, and the details of all operational leads are on our website, and say, look, I'm trying to reach out to these individuals. I haven't heard from them. Could you check with them whether they have received my email or anything like that? So it's an alternative way of trying to get access to the institution. Next question. Yes, so Rebecca has, Anne-Louise has addressed Rebecca's questions as well, which I picked up. Now, someone's asking, I'm from Tanzania, how will I know if my supervisor has submitted their statement? What usually happens is the system, you could go onto the system and check the progress of your application. So if your application is showing that is 100% and submitted, it means that the supervisor statement has been submitted as well. The supervisor statement has to be submitted at the same time as your proposal. The supervisor statement is a statement that we take into consideration when evaluating an application, and therefore it complies with the same deadline as your application. So please don't wait till the night before to submit your proposal. because once you submit your proposal, an automatic email goes to your supervisor saying, that proposal has been submitted with you as a supervisor. Could you provide your supervisory statement? Work with your supervisor to ensure that you've got enough time in the timeline to effectively do that submission as well. Abdul Rahman is asking, in a situation where a student is applying for a master's and a PhD, at what level would the student submit the proposal? So there we would expect, obviously, not the same level of proposal as someone that has completed a master's. And effectively, what happens in the competition, we create separate lists for those students that have a master's and they're pursuing simply a PhD, and a separate list for those students that they don't have a master's and they're pursuing a master's and a PhD. And when it comes to the review phase of the studentships, the thematic panels receive those two separate lists. So we ask them to apply the criteria in a different way to take into consideration that the first group of proposals were written by someone who doesn't have a master's and they're applying for a master's and a PhD. And the second set of proposals has been written by someone who already has a master's and they simply apply for a PhD. So the expectation is that you should produce the best proposal possible. And then what we do is we take into consideration whether that proposal is coming from a student with a master's or straight from their undergraduate studies. The next question is from Aman from India. When applying for the master's and PhD funding, do we need to apply for the PhD program as well, or just the master's program first? No, the application you make is for the PhD directly. And what you do in your application, you actually say, I'm applying for a 4.5-year funding because I will need to undertake a master's before I go and do the PhD. So you apply for the PhD. So what will get evaluated in the application process is your PhD proposal. And yes, the same expectation applies to those applying for a master's plus PhD, because you would need to have a supervisor supporting you. They might not start the supervision until you have completed your master's, but you will need to have their supervisory statement and everything like that as part of your application. My supervisors are uncertain is the next question. Would I qualify for the data skills and advanced quantitative methods ring-fence studentship if my research involves health and demographic surveillance data from Africa? My supervisors are uncertain because they are not using one of the eligible ESRC-funded data resources and infrastructure. So neither the data skills or the advanced quantitative methods require you to utilize one of the ESRC data sets, especially the data skills one, because I think this is the most appropriate here for what you're referring, William. As long as you can demonstrate that the PhD project will develop and deliver a new data set, or it will make use of large data, that would qualify you for the data skills, definitely ring-fence studentship. Now, whether it will qualify you for the advanced quantitative methods, it depends on the methodological approach you will be using to analyze that data. So it's not a requirement to utilize one of the ESRC funded data sources. And I believe there you're referring to the administrative data research UK data sources. So it's not a requirement that you need to use one of those in order to qualify for the data skills. Caro is having a few questions, so let's see how many of those we can take forward. Are there any issues with having the placement and collaborative partner as the same organization? How important to provide a letter of support from a collaborative partner? There is no issue. We would actually welcome the placement being in the collaborative partner if you have already a collaborative partner identified as part of your PhD. So although in the criteria, there's nothing, well, there is no formal recognition that projects that come with a collaborative partner have an advantage. In reality, it's easier to demonstrate impact if you have a collaborative partner identified in your project. So that's one point. And what we would then welcome is we would welcome the placement to take place within that collaborative partner because it will ensure some form of continuity. And you can work with your supervisor to design the placement in a way that best fits your PhD. And it doesn't have to be at the application stage, of course, it could be later on. So that's quite important. Now, if you want to have your collaborative partner formally recognized, you can name it in the proposal. There is not a requirement for a letter of intent, but or a letter of support. If you can't provide one, it's a formal recognition from the collaborative partner that they would like to be involved in this project, but it's not gonna be kind of a breaking point for securing a studentship if you name a collaborative partner and you don't have a letter of support from them. Second question is, in this research proposal section, it says that you need to cover how the research relates to your previous studies and how this relates to your career aims. Should that be covered under the personal statement? There are two separate things here. So the personal statement, the guidance on the personal statement is about yourselves, your general career aims, and how and why you have selected SENSS and how you will make use of the funding available through SENSS to foster, and progress your career. In the research proposal section, what we ask you to do is we ask you to tell us how far your prior studies have prepared you for that specific research proposal. Is what we call, and should you be successful, you will hear a lot this terminology, is what we call a development needs analysis. So assume someone wants to pursue a proposal that has a particular methodology, that they haven't covered that methodology in their prior studies. What we would expect them to do in that section of the applications to say, look, there is a gap there. I'm suggesting this methodological approach, but I haven't covered it in my prior studies or in my prior professional experience. I would like time to develop those skills in order to be able to successfully deliver that proposal. So it's a slightly different approach than what the personal statement would like. It's more of a ourselves and yourselves reflecting on the needs of the project, your skills, and what is missing or where you're strong. So we can then develop a plan, a training plan with you for the duration of your PhD. Third question, in terms of cost classification, when doing overseas fieldwork and working with peer researchers, should the reimbursable cost to them, travel expenses, be considered under budget of overseas fieldwork or RTSG? So the overseas fieldwork does not cover any costs which are not exclusively for the researcher themselves. So we will only be able to cover travel expenses for you. And one of the things that we've been asked in the past is, oh, I'm doing overseas field work and my supervisor would like to join me for some part of that overseas field work. Can I include the costs of that, those travel expenses for my supervisor under my overseas field work costs? And the answer is no. You can only ask for costs which are directly associated with your travel and your time overseas. So that's the budget of overseas. The RTSG is a budget that we wouldn't expect you to utilize to cover overseas field work because that's something that you request in your application. The RTSG, the Research Training Support Grant, is more about additional opportunities for training and development. There is not a maximum amount of budgeting in the different sections, and the reason for that is that obviously different locations, different projects might require different spends. So it's very different to talk about someone who's doing overseas field work in a remote part of the Amazon forest, and very different talking about overseas field work in, I don't know, in a place which is far more developed, let's say, because the amount of money you will need for one trip is going to be very different from the other. So there's no maximum budget there. We would expect you to provide us with kind of some rationale why is that, and of course it's an indicative budget, the one you're giving us, because obviously if your field work is not until 2 years time, a lot of things might change in those 2 years in terms of the cost. So we would expect you, when the field work um, element of the PhD kicks in, to give us kind of a re-estimated budget, and we will work with you to ensure that all your needs are covered. Right. Next question from Reza: in which website our proposal should be submitted? So on the website, on the SENSS website, there is a link to a platform which is called HEI Apply. And that platform will request you to create a profile. And from that, you will be applying then for the student-led competition. You will see now, and we've actually launched this opportunity yesterday, you will see that there are also a competition which is called a collaborative competition. This is a competition where we have selected 9 projects that supervisors have designed, and they're now advertised for candidates. You can apply to as many projects as you like for the collaborative project competition, but bear in mind that these are supervisor-led. So you will be applying to an existing project, not with your own project, and you won't be able to change it to your own project. If you're interested for the student-led, you should directly apply for the student-led competition and make one single application through one specific institution. Anozi is asking whether someone can write more than one supervisor in the SENSS form, and Andrews has correctly answered yes. We're not talking about supervisors anymore. We're talking about supervisory teams. So the expectation in most UK-based institutions is that you will have at least two supervisors. People might even suggest that they could have a third supervisor. And when we ask the supervisor for their statement, we ask them to talk about the skills and the abilities of the supervisory team instead of their own skills specifically. Lorna is asking, I would like my industry experience to be considered equivalent to a master's. Are there criteria for this? 2 points there. One is that you need to discuss this with the supervisor. And in principle, the answer is yes. So in the process I've explained and designed earlier and discussed earlier, which is the process where we ask you to provide us with your prior experience, and that can be studies, professional experience, or even life experience for some applicants. We ask you to tell us how you cover the necessary skills to deliver that project. And I have an example from the competition last year. We had someone who applied for one of the collaborative projects, and they didn't have a master's. They only had an undergraduate, but effectively they have been working in that industry for 15 years. So we said, look, you don't need a master's here to pursue the PhD. And what they did is they started their PhD straight on. We effectively consider their professional experience as equivalent to a master's. Now, the only thing that Lorna won't happen there is that you won't get awarded the master's. So what you will get at the end is the PhD. But in order to progress to the PhD, if you have relevant professional experience, and substantial professional experience, it means that we might say, look, actually, you don't need 3.5 years, 4.5 years to do a master's as well. You could go straight into the PhD. You've got the necessary skills and you will be awarded the PhD. Do I have to secure admission before applying for SENSS scholarship? You don't have to secure admission, but you will have to have an application made to one of the 8 institutions. And the reason I'm saying that is because when the deadline closes for SENSS, what we do is we take those applications and we return them back to the home institution. So if the home institution cannot find your file with your application for a PhD, they won't be able to match that with the application you've made for funding. So as I said, for a SENSS, from a SENSS perspective, you're applying to us for the funding. You're not applying for us to give you the PhD. The PhD will be awarded by one of those 8 institutions. So if we return back your application to one of the 8 institutions and you haven't made an application there, then they won't be able to match it. So you don't need to get the admission, but you need to have an application active with that institution. Regia is asking which of these are in priority: proposal to be submitted, applying for desired university, or applied in SENSS. So applying for the desired university, usually this is closely aligned with the proposal to be submitted, because the institution will ask you your proposal for the PhD. Once you've done that, you can then apply for SENSS. And in the application for SENSS, we do ask you in the opening kind of questions whether you have applied for a place already and whether you have identified a supervisor already. So unless you have done those 2 steps, you won't be able to progress with your funding applications. So if you are in touch with a supervisor, my view is prepare your application for that institution, ensure that you get the supervisor's feedback on the proposal, and refine the proposal according to the supervisor's feedback before you move forward to the application for SENSS. Right. I've covered all the questions so far on the chat, so I can move on to see whether there are any other questions remaining from the list of questions I've got. My understanding from the questions is that most of you have a good understanding of SENSS. So this is the heart of SENSS, the 6 thematic areas. As I said, they're not in order of priority. They are not attached to any studentships or anything like that. It's just a guidance on where your proposal fits. And let me just move slightly further. This is how institutions participate in these thematic areas. We go by exception here. So just see that Cranfield doesn't participate in health, well-being, and social care, or in the advanced method. So if you're thinking of applying for this theme, Cranfield can't be your home institution because they're not participating. And equally, Lincoln doesn't participate in the advanced methods, and Middlesex doesn't participate in the digital social sciences. So those institutions won't be accepting applications from those themes. So 3 steps, going back to Reza's point earlier: applying for a PhD place at your home institution before the 22nd of January, create your HI Apply account, develop your proposal with your supervisor, and submit your online application. Now, in the previous webinars, I have spent quite a lot of time talking about writing a strong proposal. So my advice here is go and review those webinars at your own time. You can find them all on the website, or you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, and the webinars are also posted there on the YouTube channel. One of the things that I would like to also ask you to do is, on the website, we have the full list of all 41 students that received studentships last year. And Regia, this presentation will also be posted online shortly after we finish. So once it's ready, so all the slides and everything like that will be available. On the website, we have the 41 profiles of the students that received funding last year. So these topics, areas, abstracts will give you a good sense of what are the most successful proposals. And going back to one of the questions earlier, which was around the UK context, Bibek is one of our current students who is working under the sustainability and climate emergency theme. He's based at the University of East Anglia. And you can see there, his project is Park, People and Pressures, evaluating protected areas and community forest governance models effectiveness for conservation and well-being in Nepal. So it is a project which is not a UK-based project. Deborah, she's a Cranfield student, Sustainability and Climate Emergency. Actually, under Deborah, there is a student profile video as well. You will see a short interview I've done with Deborah during the student induction. She's working on a community-based co-design of small-scale wastewater systems. She's doing the project with Scottish Water. Mazen Salama, again, sustainability in Cranfield, and he's doing a project in collaboration with Cadent Gas, determining the potential of hydrogen towns. And you could see a huge range of projects there. My invitation to you is go and look at those projects, because these are projects that have received funding. They are the successful projects. So, you know, Gemma is working on health, well-being and social care. She's a digital radiographer. Kwame is working under the Justice Institution and Social Change, and he's basically looking at the case of Benin in terms of intersectionality of climate and social injustices. Morgan is working on a project in the Advanced Methods for Social and Economic Research, and his project is Sound Asleep, Understanding the Real-World Applications of Auditory Sleep Stimulation. And Holly is in Digital Social Sciences, and she's looking at an exploration of the disconnects between relationships and sex education policy and young people's experiences of post-digital relationships and sex education in England. So we return back to the UK context there. But the projects on the website will give you a sense of what are the ideas that received funding last year. So discuss your research proposal with your supervisor, incorporate feedback from your interview in your application. Once you apply, you will be invited for an interview with your home institution. And what will happen is there is a period in February for those that are going to be nominated to SENSS from their home institutions, where we reopen those applications and we allow them to make changes. Really, really important. Read the SENSS application guidance notes in HI Apply. You have very detailed guidance in terms of what are expectations for each of the boxes that you need to fill. And then ensure that your application is submitted at the time that your supervisor can also submit their supervisor statement. We will be auto-emailing the supervisor once your application is in, so please make sure that you give them enough time to complete that. These are our assessment criteria. Again, I won't go into detail here because I have explained them in detail in the previous webinar. So the most important one is evidence of quality and feasibility of the proposal. I put emphasis on the word feasibility. It's not only a good proposal, but we need to get the confidence that is feasible. We are committing in giving you funding for the next minimum 3.5 years. So we need to have reassurances that the proposal is feasible. It's something that you will be able to deliver. Interdisciplinarity and impact potential, your preparedness for the proposed research and future career, and also this is where the supervisor statement plays a big role, evidence of the quality of the local research environment, including the supervisory expertise. Now, this is a set of questions that peers before you in previous webinars have asked. And just to go through some of them, and if we've got any more questions, please put them on the chat, in the chat, and I'll pick them up. I'm going to finish my master's this year from University X. Do I need to get admitted to PhD? and then can apply, or before getting admission. So you're finishing your master's, get admitted, make your application to your home institution, and then you can apply for SENSS. You don't need to have a conditional or unconditional offer, but you need to have made an application. Um, I recently applied for MSc by Research at University X and was offered a conditional admission. Can I still apply for SENSS since my aim is to proceed with PhD after the MSc program? The answer there is obviously yes, but you would need to apply for a PhD and not the MSc. So we're not accepting standalone MSc applications. You will have to apply for the PhD. I have started my PhD in January 2024 and applied for this program, but unfortunately was not successful in stage 4. So this is someone that applied the previous time. Am I eligible to apply again? The answer is yes. So we do allow people that have already started the PhD to apply, and we do allow people that have applied in the past for SENSS funding to reapply should they wish. Currently pursuing an MSc in Economics and Public Policy at University X, and I'm working on my dissertation. Can I use the same dissertation to complete my PhD in the same subject area? I think that's advisable, because your dissertation can become a very good foundation for a proposal. I've just graduated with an MSc. Can I still apply? Yes, the answer is yes, as long as you have enough time in your PhD. What is the very first step I must take in order to become eligible for SENSS? I'm a University X law student. I would like to embark on a master's degree in human rights in September. So the first step is to identify a supervisor and identify a topic. Then apply to the home institution and then apply to SENSS. Now, a very interesting question here. Are the chances of securing funding reduced if one has a master's in a humanities-based subject and it will require additional training in social sciences? The answer is no. There are not reduced chances there. We evaluate every single proposal on its merits. And what we would then need to do is we would need to examine what are the gaps of the student in order to pursue the PhD. And we will offer appropriate additional time for training. So there is nothing to suggest that your prior background will determine your level of success. It's more about your proposal and how you link that training you have or your liking with that proposal. My supervisor and I have identified someone who could act as a secondary supervisor who has provisionally agreed. Do they have to be fully on board by the time the application is submitted? The answer is yes and no, in the sense that it would be good for the primary supervisor to name them in the supervisory statement, because it gives a sense of the strength of the supervisory team. And can someone who already has a master's degree apply for the master's and PhD category? The answer is yes, but we would need to look at what kind of masters that individual holds and how much that masters prepares them for that particular project that they what are the gaps in the SENSS. I've got a question there. Can I be declined because of age or because I'm a retiree? The answer is no. We are not discriminating in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or anything else. We have had quite a few set of mature students joining us the last few years. So the answer is no. None of these characteristics actually play a negative role in the application. To the contrary, we're trying to make sure that we are fostering diversity in our selection process. I've got a set of questions around funding. The first one I've covered already. Can international students with disabilities be qualified for international EDI? The answer is no. We're not allowed by the SRC. Is it possible to be awarded SENSS for a part-time PhD while working part-time in a job? The answer is yes. You can have full-time, part-time. You could even change the proportion over the years. So if you're a full-time and a fantastic job comes in front of you. You could then switch to part-time if you are part-time and you want to focus on the PhD and get finished with it. You can switch back to full-time if you want. Um, are you less likely to get funding if you have already started your PhD? The answer is no. We have had several um, people that have received funding whilst they've started their PhD. Um, this is a question that sometimes people don't understand the context. Since my home country is India, should I be applying for a PhD place in India, or can I apply for UK universities? This is exclusively for UK universities, UK based, and you need to be residing in the UK after you received your funding. Can I apply for concurrent funding? You're not allowed to apply for any, well, you're not allowed to be co-funded. So you can apply for concurrent funding, but then if you get a studentship from somewhere else and a studentship from SENSS, you would need to select which one of the two studentships you will get. Can one apply to different universities? The answer is no. You can only apply through one university or SENSS. How many places are available? Roughly, as I said, around 40 every year. How many of the 41 SENSS studentships were awarded last year were given to international students? I said 30% quota. So last year we had 13 international students in the cohort. Apart from the fees that the funding covers, what are the funding benefits? So you get your fees covered, you get a stipend, which is approximately £20,000 a year. And then you get your RTSG, which is the Research Training Support Grant, which is an additional £3,000 per year to spend on training and development. As I said, we're not covering visa costs, we're not covering the NHS surcharge costs. Aman, I have the email addresses at the end of the presentation, so I'll come to those later. Henry is asking, can students with SRS supervisors apply, or would you suggest a third supervisor from a different department? Henry, what do you mean by SRS? You could either come on mic or post it in the chat. Sports department. It depends on whether that institution has the sports department has proposed that sports department being eligible for SENSS. Again, it will all go down to the research question that you're asking. So if your research question is a social sciences research question, the project will be eligible. Now, whether the supervisors will be eligible to supervise you, that's a different question, which perhaps is something you could discuss with your home institution because they will have more information on that. And if they're not, there's still ways that you could submit the project. So what usually happens if there is a department which is not eligible, what they do is they find a supervisor from another department who is eligible, and they submit a proposal with them as part of the supervisory team. So there are different ways which you can discuss with your operational lead in order to find ways of overcoming any potential barriers. Can a university reject my application, not admit me for PhD even when I meet all the requirements? The answer is yes. I'm afraid it's at the discretion of universities to admit you for a PhD. It's not a guaranteed process, and there's nothing at SENSS we could do about that because, as I said, we're not dealing with the admission process at those institutions. We're only dealing with the funding process that follows. So that's questions around the funding. And then the last bit is questions around the proposal. How can we access the materials in regard to developing the research proposal and personal statement? These are all things that I have covered in presentations in the past. So they are there, all the recordings are there with the slides and everything. I discovered the research topics emanate from 6 themes. Could you kindly elaborate on these themes so we can know which one to go for? As I said, on the website, there is a list of each of those themes, which tells you which sustainable goals they are attached to, which are the ESRC priors. But for me, the most interesting thing would be to go and look at the profiles of the students that have received funding, because these will tell you what kind of projects fit into the different themes. Um, can my research proposal address ESRC priorities and SDGs that aren't outlined as part of the SENSS theme it falls under? The answer is yes. This is not an exclusive list. It's a list that provides guidance. So if you want to argue that there is another sustainable development goal that you're tackling, which is not part of that theme, that is absolutely fine. It's within your prerogative to do that. The technicalities of the proposal, the length, all those things are part of our guidance. And because I don't want to share information which is not accurate, my advice is always read the guidance which is attached to the HI apply application. That tells you everything you need to know around the application process. If applying for the advanced data analysis skills direction, the proposal can still be on any other topic, but just using advanced data analysis, the answer is yes. So you don't need to be, if you're using advanced quantitative methods or data skills, you don't need to apply through the advanced methods thematic area. It could be through any other thematic area as long as your proposal talks to that theme. And there is no need to give us certificates. It's more about talking about your project and talking about your prior experience. What factors should one consider when selecting a university for the PhD? Well, for me, it's not necessarily the university, it's more around the supervisor. So the supervisors play a crucial role in that process. That's where I would focus, not necessarily the university. Um, I have already secured 2 supervisors. However, I haven't as yet got feedback on my application. What are the implications? Well, they're not, if you've got your 2 supervisors, if they're happy to support your application, you know, um, work with them until the deadline. That's, you know, email them until the deadline. You might get some feedback from them. It's important to get their commitment that they will be submitting the supervisory statement. That's for me the most important element. So if there are any implications, those implications will come from the fact that they might not, they might not want to support the application at that stage. So make sure that you get their commitment that they will be submitting their supervisory statement. Should the research topic be country specific? The answer is no. It could be anything. Should we include the project timeline as part of the research proposal? The answer is yes. It goes back to the feasibility. So if you do give us a timeline, it, it's a convincing evidence that it is a feasible kind of proposal. And usually people refer to primary and secondary supervisor. The primary supervisor is usually the person that does the day-to-day management of the PhD. The secondary supervisor is someone who comes and contributes in a more infrequent way to the PhD, but you know, they should be working together as a team, as a supervisory team, to help you with your PhD. Now, more information, and going back to the email addresses that you've asked before, the studentships overview on our website. We've got 2 blogs in terms of how to apply for PhD funding and how to apply for a PhD in the UK from colleagues and myself. We used to write them when I was at Kent. If there are any academic type of inquiries, my email is always open to questions. If there are issues with your application process, the system that you're using or anything like that, please use the admin at senss-ttp.ac.uk. That's much more frequently monitored, and the people that monitor that email address are the ones that can help you and provide you with technical assistance. If you send it to director, I'm afraid I will have them to forward it on to them. So you're losing crucial time. Go straight to them if it's for any administrative or application platform issues, and come to me if you want any advice on academic inquiries. Okay. So there is a follow-up that supervisors are committed and even initiated follow-ups. So I think you need to ask them to check with the admissions people. Sometimes applications get lost in the process, so they need to they need internally to chase that application from within the university in order to move forward. So, but from what I'm reading there, it looks like you're on the right track, because the securing the supervisor and being in conversation with them is the most important part. Um, I think that's all from my side. It was a very interesting webinar, because it wasn't the usual me talking, and it was more about very interactive with plenty of questions. We've covered quite a lot of ground with the different questions that you've asked through the chat function. I'll leave it a couple of minutes just in case anybody else has any kind of burning questions. And if not, then we'll bring this webinar to a close, and I'll stop sharing my screen. As I said earlier, the recording of the session will be made available shortly. So I'm hoping overnight Zoom will send me the recording. I can then download it and send it to Aaron, who's our admin assistant, for putting it onto our YouTube channel and on the website. It might appear on the YouTube channel before the website. So feel free to follow us on our YouTube. You might also find very interesting additional information there, because we post everything from SENSS Live on the YouTube channel. So it's not simply these webinars, but quite a few other things.
Hi, Professor.
Yes.
Thank
So
you
we,
for
yes,
uh,
Reza.
okay. Thank you for your time and your patience. Thank you very much, and for your useful information that you told during this presentation. I have a question, please, about the supervisor feedback. What do you
Mhm.
mean? Where this feedback should be noted or should be recorded? What do you mean by the supervisor feedback?
So when you engage with the supervisor, they will give you some feedback on your application, and what will happen there is they would expect you to provide to incorporate that feedback into your sense application. So it's a dialogue with the supervisors in order to develop the proposal. So that's what I mean by supervisor feedback. So you send the initial proposal to the supervisors, they give you some feedback, then you incorporate that feedback, you send it back to them until the point they say your proposal is ready, you can submit it.
I mean, is it necessary for Sense to have these feedbacks?
No,
Not.
no, no.
Mm,
We only look at the final proposal. It's just part of the process that you need to do.
Thank you, Professor.
Um, and I've got a question from Anika there. Does assessing feasibility provide space for progress made after training through the program? Um, I would probably not necessarily put it under feasibility. I would put it more under the personal statement and your career aim. So, in a way, when we look at the application, although there is guidance to the panels where to look for each of those criteria, and the criteria are all on on the documentation there is on the website, so there's nothing hidden. Um, we ask them to review the application in what I would call a holistic way. So, they look at the personal statement, they look at the supervisor statement, they look at everything else. And if there are areas where they feel they can contribute to points made on feasibility, points made on impact, points made on the interdisciplinarity of the proposal, they should take that information from there and score that criterion accordingly.
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah.
Uh, the supervisor that I am in touch told me that there is a committee that decides my proposal is acceptable or not. Is it true? May you tell me more about it?
Yeah, so once the university makes the nomination to SENSS, there is a committee, there is a panel for each theme, which includes representatives from all institutions that belong to that theme. They review all applications, they score all applications, and then they have a meeting to decide which ones are the strongest applications that they would like to put forward to that big list that we construct for the management board. So yes, there is a committee that reviews all those applications. And should your application is unsuccessful at that stage, that committee will also give you feedback on the application and why that application was unsuccessful. Right. I see we probably come to the end of the questions. Um, Thank you very much for your funding. I'm looking forward to receiving and reading your applications. I do get to read a lot of the applications as well. So good luck with those applications. And for those of you that you're going on a break, enjoy your break. Thank you.